All right, in discussing this Matthew passage, um, let's look at the questions. It says, how does this passage tell us to react if treated unjustly? Tells us to not to resist the one who is evil, turn to him the other cheek, and also go with him 2 miles. And also another one I forgot to put in there. If he takes your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. So all of these things we would look and say um, are allow it to happen and um, do not retaliate. Now, in my Bible, that's even the heading here in this Sermon on the Mount section. It's about retaliation. So what Jesus is telling us not to do is to have a motivation of retaliation, like I'm going to get you for this. I'm going to get back at you, which is, which does not have the other person's best interest at heart. Um, he's telling us, and let's just go to question number 2. It says, how does this passage tell us to treat our enemies, to love them and pray for them? Well, obviously, retaliation is not in love. It does not care for the other person. Retaliation is a vengeance. You're gonna get yours, and I'm gonna be the one that delivers the justice here. And it's not looking out for their best interest at all. So how do these two things square? This Matthew passage with what we've been looking at in Acts and in Daniel. And you can see the what I've got written down here, so I'm not going to take the time to read that to you. But I got this from a sermon, from a message taken from John Piper off Desiring God. And here on the bottom of the screen, you can see the web address where that's taken from. And you're welcome to go there and look at that, and you can read over the whole thing and maybe get a better idea of what I'm trying to convey here. Because, whenever somebody is resisting, we don't have the right, or whenever somebody is disobedient towards an authority because they're being disobedient to God, that we still have to look at the best intentions for that person. We're not merely retaliating and saying you are being disobedient, so I'm going to beat you down, or I'm going to oppose you because I want to show you that you're wrong, and in essence try to be the authority over them. But we need to look at them with mercy and compassion and say, you're being disobedient to God, and I love you enough not to just comply with that. And but I would encourage you to go to that website to look at this, because admittedly this is not an easy subject, because there's going to be a real tendency, even though we have gone through all of this stuff talking about being in submission, there could be a real tendency for students to latch onto this one and say, I'm going to be disobedient because the Bible gives me the permission to be disobedient. And again, as I said at the beginning, that's the extreme case, not the norm. Most all the time, God is calling us to be in submission to those in authority over us, because that, in essence, is submission to Him. And so let's not give the devil an opportunity here. Let's make sure that we're very clear on this. And telling them what they need to do in order to line up with Scripture in situations. And if you look through that, it's not going to be a one-for-one correlation with our teaching in this lesson. But if you look over that message by Piper, it's written out, and he gives some guidelines for some things that will be helpful in helping judge when is a time to be disobedient and when is not a time to be disobedient. So look that over, and let's move on to the took portion. All right, as we move into the the took portion of the lesson this week, we're going to have several different scenarios for the students to work through. In an increasingly secularistic and postmodern humanistic society, students are going to have opportunity over and over to stand up for their faith and do those kind of things, because there's just going to be opposition to Christianity. So what I want to do now is to look through each one of these scenarios real quickly with you and kind of give you some background on what I'm thinking on these. Number one, your teacher or professor walks in the classroom and puts in a film depicting a postmodern existentialism. You may have to explain to them what postmodern existentialism is. This film features a homosexual male couple as an appropriate picture of existentialism, and even shows several love scenes showing the love between the men. What would you do in this situation? You're asking the students, what do you do in this situation? The reason I put this in there is because this actually happened to Sherry whenever she was in college in Batesville. She was at the community college there, and the professor walked in, put in this tape of a movie depicting this very thing that I've described to you. Her reaction was to get up and leave the class that day, and knowing full well that she was going to be graded on this. She was going to be, because they were going to have to take a quiz over it and all of this stuff. And she got up and left. Ended up having to go and talk to the professor the next time she was in class. The professor called her up and asked her why she had left, and she explained to her why she had done that, and that she didn't want to be exposed to those kind of things, and didn't believe that that was appropriate or a lifestyle that was acceptable to God, and went through all of this stuff. And as a result, the professor ended up giving her a different movie to watch, and was able to be tested over that. Now, there was an essence of disobedience in that, because she was not going to subject herself to that and agree that that was okay in that situation, knowing the consequences might get her a 0 on the paper or on the test. But now, was that an act of disobedience that would be that would line up with what God would say was okay? And I believe so, because she did it in a respectful manner, understanding that that she could not agree with that it would not be acceptable to God. That was not an acceptable lifestyle. That was not something that she needed to let into her mind. And so, anyway, it worked out well for her, but she could have received a 0 on the paper. And so, like, I want them to confront these kind of things and say, is that an okay act of disobedience there for somebody to get up and walk out of the classroom and be willing to accept the consequences? I would say about this particular incident as well that it was an opportunity for the gospel, because after talking to her professor, she was able to, the professor said, can you give me some scriptures that would back up what you're claiming, that homosexuality is a sin against God and it's not right? And so we sat down together and we made those out, and she was able to take them to her the next class period. She, in fact, called her up first thing and asked her if she had the scriptures, and she said yeah, and she looked at the paper and said, oh, well, these will give me something to think about, because I've never seen a lot of these before. And so, we're hoping that God used that in her life. We don't know, but at the same time, I believe that was an instance where it was for her well-being, that there was a resistance to that, and that God could use it through His Word to change her heart. So, again, we don't know if He did or not, but it was an opportunity for the gospel. So that, I think, gives it even a little bit more. So maybe I gave it some more validity in that case. So.